It's going to go wrong. That sentence, not out loud, never out loud. It doesn't rush in. It shows up slowly, almost gently, like it's just an observation, a small thing your mind notices before you even notice it. You send a message, 15 minutes pass with no reply, and there it is. It's going to go wrong. You're driving home, replaying a conversation from earlier that day, a word they used, a shift in their tone, a pause that felt off, and there it is again. It's going to go wrong. Everything is fine. Your relationship is stable. No one fought. Nothing actually happened. And still, sometime during the day, maybe in the bathroom mirror, maybe in that quiet second before sleep, it shows up. It's going to go wrong. Notice what happens in your body when you hear that, because it isn't just a thought. It has weight. It lives somewhere physical. Maybe it's a light pressure in your chest. Maybe your throat tightens just a little, not enough for you to fully register, but enough for your system to feel it. Maybe your shoulders lift without you realizing, like your body is already bracing for an impact that hasn't come. Your body hears the sentence before your mind finishes processing it. And that matters, because this isn't about positive thinking versus negative thinking. It isn't about optimism. It isn't even about whether you're an anxious person. This is about an internal system that learned at some point that anticipating loss before it arrives feels safer than being caught off guard. Stay with me. By the end of this video, you'll recognize when this sentence started running your life. Not as a mistake, not as a flaw in you, but as a protective mechanism, one that slowly began costing more than it was protecting. First, something important. This is not weakness. Repeating fearful sentences inside a relationship, expecting something bad to happen even when things are calm. Reading silence as distance and distance as abandonment, that isn't being dramatic. It isn't immaturity, it isn't oversensitivity. It's a system that was built for a reason, with its own logic, with a real history behind it, and systems that were built can be understood. This video isn't about techniques. There's no 5-step list, no promise of quick relief. What we're going to do is different. We're going to go back to where this sentence began, not in an abstract way, in a way you'll recognize. Real situations. Real moments, the kind that happen on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon while no one else notices anything at all. We'll look at the invisible cost, not the kind that shows up in big fights or breakups, but the slow erosion of living in pre-pain, suffering ahead of something that hasn't even happened. And we'll stay with this thought long enough for it to lose a little of its authority over you, because that's the real shift. Not eliminating the sentence, not banning fear, but spending enough time inside it that it stops sounding like absolute truth and starts sounding like what it actually is, an old alarm triggered by a system that still thinks you're 17 and that anything you love could be taken from you without warning. You've felt this, haven't you? That moment when someone you care about is right there beside you, everything is okay, and yet a part of you is already rehearsing the pain. Not the pain of now, the pain of later, the one you're not even sure will come, but from your system's point of view, it's already on the way. That's the thought we're following today. It's going to go wrong. 3 words, short, simple, and powerful enough to reorganize your entire emotional world around a threat that doesn't even exist yet. Over the next few minutes, we'll understand where this sentence came from, how it settled into you, why it keeps repeating even when your present life no longer supports it, and what begins to change when you learn to hear it without obeying it. No rush. No checklists, nothing that sounds like a manual, just enough time with a thought you probably know very, very well. Oliver was 28. He lived in a second-floor apartment in a complex in Austin. He had an analyst job that paid well enough that he didn't complain, and he had a girlfriend named Ashley, who to anyone looking from the outside was exactly the kind of person who makes someone happy. She was attentive, consistent. She texted in the morning, remembered things he mentioned, showed up when she said she would, didn't cancel plans without warning, didn't disappear without explanation, never gave him a real reason to doubt her. Oliver knew that. He knew it in a conscious, rational, provable way. If someone asked, a friend, a therapist, anyone. He could list the evidence. Ashley was reliable. Ashley was present. Ashley had never shown any real sign of trouble. And still, it was an ordinary Monday. The night before, Ashley had said she was having lunch with co-workers and might be hard to reach during the day. She gave a heads up, no mystery. She even sent the name of the restaurant, as if somehow context might help. Oliver woke up at 7, drank his coffee standing in the kitchen, got on the highway for his 40-minute commute, arrived, opened his laptop. The morning moved normally. Emails, a 9 o'clock call, a spreadsheet that needed reviewing. At 10:30, between tasks, he texted Ashley. Something simple, an inside joke, the kind of message that doesn't need a quick reply. She didn't answer. At 11:15, Oliver was in a team meeting, but part of his attention wasn't there. It was on his phone, face down on the table, waiting for a vibration that never came. He heard the voices around him, processed just enough to seem present, but underneath there was a thin thread of attention constantly pulled somewhere else. It's going to go wrong. He didn't think the exact word. They didn't arrive clearly or neatly. They showed up as a feeling, a faint tightening just below his sternum, almost too subtle to notice, but enough to tint everything around him slightly differently, like the way the sky shifts before rain. Nothing dramatic, just different. Lunchtime came. Oliver walked alone to the Chipotle near the office, picked up his order, sat at a small table by the window. Sunlight angled in. People were talking around him. The temperature outside was perfect. He opened his phone. Nothing. He knew. She had warned him. This was exactly when she'd be out with co-workers. He had all the information, and still his mind moved. Quick, quiet, almost polite in the way it built the story. Maybe she's been distant lately. Maybe something changed. Maybe that conversation last week landed heavier than it seemed. Maybe she's fine, just not with him. And when his mind went there, his body followed. His chest felt heavier. The food lost its taste, not dramatically, just subtly, like someone had turned the flavor down. He ate half, threw the rest away, walked back to the office carrying a background state that wasn't quite sadness, not anger, just wait. At 2 in the afternoon, Ashley replied. 3 messages in a row. The joke back, an emoji, a ridiculous photo she took at the table of a co-worker holding a glass of water in a completely random way. Oliver looked at the screen, and what he felt first wasn't joy, it was relief. Fast. Strong. Too strong for a situation that objectively had never been a threat. It felt like a rescue, not like a delayed reply, and the intensity of that relief quietly revealed how real the tension had been. He typed back, smiled to himself. The afternoon regained its color, but he didn't think about what had happened between 10:30 and 2. He didn't register it. Didn't name it, didn't connect the tasteless lunch to the tightness before the meeting, to the message he'd sent that hadn't actually needed an answer. He just kept going. This happened often, more often than Oliver had ever stopped to measure. Not just with texts, with Ashley's tone on a night when she was simply tired. Not tired of him, just tired. The kind that comes after a long week and a Friday that never really ends. With her getting home late 3 times in 1 week. With a quick "I'm fine" that sounded 1 millimeter different while she watched TV. Each of those moments triggered the same cycle. The sentence arrived, sometimes as words, sometimes only as a sensation. The body reacted before the mind finished processing. The mind built scenarios from whatever fragments were available, and when fragments were missing, it filled in the rest. And without realizing it, Oliver started behaving differently, not dramatically, in ways so subtle they never became a conversation. He asked more questions than usual, not from genuine curiosity, but from checking. You okay? Are we okay? They sounded like care, but underneath, they were monitoring, a way of confirming the ground was still there, that the other person was still present, that nothing had shifted while he wasn't looking. Sometimes he did the opposite. He withdrew, got quieter, less present. Not by choice, but because part of him was fully occupied managing a fear Ashley didn't even know existed. She'd be right there across the table, or sitting on the other end of the couch, and Oliver would be physically present while a fraction of him lived somewhere else, in an imagined future, inside a loss that hadn't happened. Ashley noticed, not always, not clearly enough to name, but she noticed. You disappeared today. Is something going on? And Oliver would say no, because from the standpoint of facts, nothing was happening. No one fought. No one did anything wrong. There was nothing to report. Just a thought that appeared at 10:30 on an ordinary Monday morning and quietly reorganized the entire day around itself, without asking, without warning, without leaving visible traces. You do this sometimes too, don't you? It doesn't have to be an unanswered text. It might be a silence at dinner, a plan someone cancelled, a small shift in routine that means nothing rationally, but that your system registers as a warning signal before you even decide what to think. The system is fast. It works before logic. Before you choose what to feel, it has already felt it. Before you analyze the situation, it has already concluded. And it isn't wrong for existing. It was built for a reason, at a time that makes sense when you look closely enough. But the cost is this: living slightly outside the present moment, with part of your attention always scanning the horizon, watching to see if the worst is coming. If that lives in you too, you're not alone here. The alarm doesn't scream. That's exactly what makes it so effective. If it screamed, you'd notice. You'd look at it, identify it, maybe even question it. But it doesn't scream. It whispers, and it whispers in the most familiar voice there is, your own, in the same tone you use when you're just thinking, with the same rhythm as any ordinary thought drifting through your mind on a random afternoon. It's going to go wrong, and because it sounds like you, it sounds like truth. Oliver's alarm didn't run on a schedule. It didn't need an obvious trigger, didn't need an objectively threatening situation or a clear reason to exist. Sometimes it showed up in the morning, before he even touched his phone, a background state like radio static, already tinting the day before anything had happened, before the first text, before the first interaction, as if the system woke up with him and said without words, "Stay alert, something could be coming." Other times, it arrived right in the middle of a good moment. Oliver and Ashley at a Sunday brunch, eggs and coffee, sunlight pouring through the apartment window, no tension, no reason, and right there, in the middle of something that, from the outside, looked perfect, the sentence appeared: "It's going to go wrong." Not always as words, sometimes just as a slight tightening in his chest, a 2-inch distance from himself, a quiet part of him, slipping out of the present moment and moving into an imagined future where the loss had already happened, where Ashley had left or pulled away or changed in some way he hadn't seen coming in time. And his behavior shifted automatically. No deliberation. He'd grow a little quieter at the table or ask indirect questions, not about what he felt, but about the situation, about Ashley, about plans for the coming week, checking, confirming the ground was still solid, making sure nothing had changed while he was looking down at the eggs on his plate. Sometimes he'd send one extra text that day, not out of spontaneous affection, but out of monitoring disguised as affection. Sometimes he'd do the opposite, send nothing at all, a silent test. He didn't even realize he was running, waiting to see if she noticed, if she filled the space, if the ground stayed firm even when he wasn't constantly pressing his weight into it. The alarm shaped all of this without announcing itself, without asking permission, without leaving a note behind. Notice the next time a small situation, a delayed reply, a slightly different tone, a last-minute cancelled plan with a perfectly reasonable explanation, shifts your internal state far more than what actually happened. Not to judge yourself, not to criticize your reaction, just to notice the proportion, because when the alarm fires intensely in response to something small, it isn't responding to the present, it's responding to an old file, a memory of threat that was real in another context, in another time, with other people who are not the ones in your life now. You know that moment, don't you? When the intensity of what you feel doesn't match the size of what actually happened. And this is where the shadow enters, not as a villain, as an architect. It built the alarm, carefully, precisely, with an internal logic that was perfect for the time it was created. It didn't make a mistake. It responded to what existed. The problem isn't that it exists. The problem is that it kept running long after the context changed. This shadow has a name, the rejection reader. The rejection reader is the part of Oliver that learned, long before Ashley, long before any adult relationship, that small signals matter, that a shift in tone can mean distance. That distance can mean disapproval. That disapproval can mean loss. And that loss, in that earlier world, was something you couldn't prepare for, something that arrived without warning, without explanation, and that the only defense available was anticipation. Picture a Thursday afternoon. Oliver is 12, maybe 13, at home in a quiet suburb outside Dallas. That late-day smell in the house, a TV murmuring in another room, the sun already turning orange through the living room window. He's waiting for his father to come home from work. His father walks in, sets his bag down, answers Oliver's "hey" with a single syllable, goes straight to the bedroom. At dinner, he's physically present but emotionally absent in a way that fills the room. Short answers, eyes on his plate, none of the usual comments about his day. Oliver doesn't know what happened. No one explains, and a 12-year-old mind doesn't have access to the concept of "my dad had a hard day at work" and is processing it quietly. A 12-year-old mind has access to only one question, not in words but as a feeling. What did I do wrong? What changed? What do I need to fix so things go back to normal? It wasn't a rational conclusion, it was emotional survival. If I can figure out what changed, if I can read the signs early enough, if I can adjust before things get worse, maybe I can keep the ground steady, maybe I can prevent the loss. That's where the Rejection Reader was born, or in moments like that. A collection of moments, not necessarily dramatic, not marked by obvious trauma, sometimes just repeated unpredictability in the emotional responses around him. The sense that an important person's mood could shift without warning, and that the only way to stay safe was to learn to read the room before it turned threatening. Years of silent training, years of tracking micro-expressions, tones of voice, pauses that lasted 1 second too long, until the system became so finely tuned that it started firing even when there was nothing to read, filling empty spaces with old archives. This thought didn't appear out of nowhere. It was trying to protect you from something that was once real, and the shadow, once named, loses power, because the moment you can say, it's you, when the sentence arrives, it stops being you. It stops being automatic truth. It becomes a system inside you, separate, recognizable, with a history you can understand, with a reason for existing that makes sense when you look closely, and what has a name can be observed. What can be observed cannot run the whole system alone. But before we get there, there's a trap. Look carefully at this part, because it feels completely logical, but it's fear disguised as reasoning. The trap is this: when it's going to go wrong appears, the natural impulse, almost irresistible, is to fight it, to argue back, to build the opposite case. Ashley texted this morning. She said she loves me last week. She told me about lunch. There's no real sign of a problem. I'm overreacting. It sounds healthy. It sounds like exactly the kind of rational thinking that should calm anxiety. But notice what happens underneath. You are taking the thought seriously enough to build evidence against it. You are entering a debate with the Rejection Reader, which means you've already granted it authority, and the alarm interprets that debate as confirmation that there was something to debate. Every time Oliver built the counter-argument, every time he listed reasons not to worry, his system quietly registered, this thought matters, it deserves a structured response, and it grew slightly stronger, slightly more present the next time, slightly more convinced of its own authority. Fighting the thought strengthens the alarm, not because the intention is wrong, but because the fight assumes something fundamental, that the thought has decision-making power over your experience, that it must be defeated, refuted, silenced before you can move on. And that assumption is exactly what keeps the Rejection Reader at the center. It doesn't need to be defeated, it needs to be observed. Is there a moment in your day when this sentence gets louder? A specific time, a situation that reliably triggers it, a certain kind of silence your system reads as danger before you've processed anything. If there is, that's your doorway, not to avoid the moment, but to recognize it when it arrives, with the right name, without entering the debate. There's a part of you that has heard this sentence before, not once, many times, so many times that you already know the path it takes, the tightening that comes with it, the quiet it installs, the way it rearranges your entire day around itself without asking. That part of you recognizes the Rejection Reader, by its pattern, by the weight in your chest that appears before logic, by the silent monitoring disguised as attentiveness, by the checking that sounds like care. But underneath is fear, trying to make sure the ground is still there. And that same part, the one that has watched this cycle repeat enough times to recognize its shape, has an ability the rejection reader does not. It can step back, not to fight, not to persuade, not to build a counter-argument and enter a debate, just to observe, with a distance of 2 inches, the smallest space between a thought and automatic obedience, a space that seems too small to matter until you realize it's exactly where freedom begins. That part has a name: the clear adult. The clear adult isn't louder than the rejection reader. It isn't braver. It isn't more confident. It doesn't arrive with certainty about how things will end. It doesn't promise things will work out. It doesn't replace fear with artificial reassurance. It brings something else, conscious presence in the exact moment your system wants to react automatically. The ability to stay in the moment without needing the moment to feel safe first. When "it's going to go wrong" appears, the rejection reader says, obey, act now, send the message, monitor, prepare for loss. The clear adult says, I hear you, I recognize you, but I don't have to obey right now. It's not denial. It's not trying to feel different from what you feel. It's simply a pause. 1 extra second before the automatic behavior takes over. A small space that, over time, through repetition, becomes the place where real choices happen. Oliver found that second by accident. One Wednesday night, Ashley took a while to reply again. Not long, maybe an hour, but long enough. The alarm fired at its usual speed. His chest tightened. His mind started building the story from whatever fragments it could find, filling the empty spaces with old files. And instead of sending another text or withdrawing into the quiet of his apartment, Oliver sat on the couch with his phone face down on the cushion beside him and did something very small, almost unintentional. He noticed what was happening inside him. It's happening again. Not with judgment, not with frustration, not with the heaviness of someone failing a test he thinks he should have passed long ago. Just a clean observation, almost clinical. The rejection reader is here. It arrived with the silence. That makes sense. Silence was dangerous once. The system still connects the two. It isn't true anymore, but the update hasn't reached it yet. Ashley replied 40 minutes later. She had been on a long call with her mum about a family issue she'd briefly mentioned days earlier, something Oliver had heard at the time, but that had completely disappeared from his working memory once the alarm cycle began. She explained, sent a short voice note, asked if he was okay. Oliver looked at his phone and noticed something he didn't yet have words for. He had spent those 40 minutes differently, not without discomfort. The tightness in his chest had been there the whole time, real, present, not suppressed, not denied, but he hadn't fed the cycle. He hadn't sent checking messages. He hadn't built the full catastrophic story. He hadn't sat there refreshing the conversation every 3 minutes, waiting for the typing bubbles to appear. He had stayed with the discomfort without letting it turn into behavior, small, almost invisible from the outside. The kind of thing that never becomes a story you tell anyone, but different from every time before. And this is exactly what the 30-day practice is about. It isn't a rigid program. It isn't a routine with fixed times and numbered steps you have to follow perfectly and track on a spreadsheet. It's a new relationship with an old thought, built through small movements, imperfect ones, repeated without expecting a straight line or visible progress week by week. 3 movements. You can use them whenever the sentence appears. In the morning, during the commute, in the middle of lunch at Chipotle, or in that second before sleep when the mind finally slows down. First, notice the sentence, not analyze it right away, not try to figure out where it came from or why it chose this exact moment. Just name it internally with the clarity a name gives. The rejection reader is here. That sounds simple. It isn't. The system is fast. It operates below conscious attention. You will miss this moment many times before you start catching it consistently. The alarm's speed was trained for years. You are retraining a slower, more deliberate response. That takes time. This isn't failure, it's how retraining works. Second, identify the fear underneath the sentence, not the situation, not the other person's behavior, the specific fear with shape and edges that the situation triggers. I'm afraid this silence means distance. I'm afraid something has changed and I won't know until it's too late. I'm afraid of being caught off guard by loss, the way I was before. Naming the fear precisely removes its fog. A named fear has boundaries, and boundaries mean size. It isn't infinite. It isn't the whole world. It isn't the complete truth of what's happening right now. Third, act without obeying. That doesn't mean acting as if the fear isn't there. It doesn't mean you successfully turned off the alarm and are suddenly free. It means choosing an action that is not dictated by the alarm. Sometimes that action is no action at all. Not sending the checking text, not asking the indirect question, not testing the silence to see if it fills itself. Sometimes it's a direct, honest action. I'm feeling a weird anxiety right now. It's not about you. I just wanted to say it out loud. Sometimes it's simply continuing what you were doing, washing the dishes, finishing the episode, making coffee, and letting the thought occupy the space it occupies without building an entire world around it. The small step is what changes everything. Not the big transformative conversation, not the brave decision that rewrites the pattern overnight, the extra second before obeying, the 3-line note in your phone in a parking lot, the breath before sending a message that didn't need to be sent, choosing to sit on the couch with discomfort instead of feeding it. These seconds accumulate, not visibly, not in a way you can measure or show someone, but they accumulate. And at some point, without a date, without warning, the clear adult begins to arrive earlier. Not always, not perfectly, but often enough to quietly change the quality of your experience. There will be setbacks. This isn't a warning. It's a certainty. There will be days when the rejection reader arrives with an intensity you didn't expect. When you're tired, vulnerable, unguarded, and you obey completely before you even realize what happened. You send the messages. You build the full scenario. You spend hours inside an imagined future that never arrives, suffering a loss that hasn't happened with someone who is still there. That doesn't undo anything you've built. The system doesn't rebuild in a straight line. It rebuilds in a spiral. You return to the same point, seemingly the same place as always, but with one invisible difference. You came back with 1 millimeter more awareness than last time. You know the path now. You know the name. You know, even if only after the cycle finishes, what happened and why. After becomes during. During becomes before. No punishment. No resetting the counter. No story about failing again. Just continuity. The only movement real practice requires. A real day. Oliver on a Tuesday morning, sitting in the parking lot at work, engine off, co-workers walking past, coffee still warm in the cup holder. Ashley had been strangely quiet at breakfast. Not tense, not cold, just inward, the kind of quiet that could mean anything or nothing. But Oliver's system registered it as a signal before any conscious thought arrived. He sat in the car for 2 minutes before going inside, opened the Notes app, wrote 3 lines, thought she was different this morning. It's going to go wrong. Fear that her distance means something has changed and I won't know until it's too late. Minimal action. Don't send a checking message now. If it still feels heavy at lunch, speak directly. No accusation, just presence. 3 lines, 2 minutes in a parking lot before the workday. It didn't remove the discomfort. The tightness in his chest was still there when he stepped into the elevator, still there during the first hour of work, still faintly there when he got coffee at 10:30 and stood a moment longer by the hallway window before returning to his desk. But the rejection reader didn't run the day. Oliver worked, ate lunch, kept going. At the end of the day, Ashley texted she was tired, leaving work early. Did he want to have dinner at home? She was going to make the pasta he liked. The quiet that morning hadn't meant anything beyond a quiet morning. Just someone processing something small inside their own day. Nothing to do with Oliver. No threat, no sign of real distance. The rejection reader didn't know that in the morning. And that's okay. It never will know ahead of time. But Oliver is slowly learning not to let that uncertainty govern the entire day while the answer hasn't arrived yet. This will happen often. The alarm will fire. You'll spend minutes or hours managing a fear that feels completely real inside you, and the outcome will show there was never a threat. That isn't wasted time. That is the practice happening. It is the rejection reader being exposed again and again to evidence that the present is not the past, that this person is not that person, that this silence is not that silence. Repeated exposure is what updates the file. The shadow, once named, loses power. The rejection reader will keep appearing. It was built over years, through silent signal reading, through preparing for a loss that was real in another time, with other people, in a world that no longer exists. It doesn't disappear because of a video. It doesn't disappear after a month of practice. It doesn't disappear just because you understand where it came from, but it begins to lose authority. And there is an enormous difference, one that never shows up in any statistic, but that you will feel in your body, between a thought that arrives and commands, and a thought that arrives and is observed, between a sentence that governs your entire day and a sentence that passes through the day without turning into behavior, between the rejection reader at the center of your experience, organizing everything around itself, and the rejection reader sitting quietly in the corner of the room, present, recognized, named, understood, but not in charge. This difference isn't visible from the outside. It doesn't change how you look in photos. It doesn't change what you casually tell someone at happy hour. It doesn't have a label in any system the world uses to measure how people are doing, but you will feel it. On an ordinary day, in an undramatic moment, you'll notice you were fully present at dinner, in a conversation, sitting on the couch next to someone, without that constant thread of attention pulled toward the horizon, without the rejection reader scanning the background while life happens in front of you. Just you, in the moment, without pre-suffering something that hasn't happened. That's what this practice builds, not the absence of the thought, the presence of a choice. And thank you for staying here with me.